First of all, let's talk about the conception of Twisted Issues, because I read that it started originally as like a documentary of the Florida punk scene, right? And then it gradually shifted into its current form. So how did that happen? Like, were you big in that scene, or?
Yeah, and I was in a band. I'm actually in probably 5 or 6 of the bands that are in the soundtrack, one form or the other. So I was already in that scene, and I felt there was, and at that point there weren't video cameras everywhere, certainly no iPhones or whatever, and basically my father had bought a RCA camcorder that sort of, he liked to get tech stuff, but then he'd always like kind of hand it to me. Of the 3 boys that he had, I was the one who was always, if he got a new stereo, he'd give the receiver to me and all this kind of stuff, and because I was interested. So I ended up having this RCA camcorder that, and saw it as an opportunity to document what I considered a very vital scene, the Gainesville, Florida punk scene. And you'd see a show, and then the show would end. And I'm talking, when I say show, we're talking about in living rooms. A lot of the house party was the thing in Gainesville in the 80s, and quickly was suppressed or whatever, because suddenly it became illegal to have house parties because it made so much noise and all that kind of stuff, and the neighbors would complain and that kind of stuff. But there was this bubble of time where it was the place to, you remember the show at the Blue House? There'd be certain iconic houses, group homes and stuff where people would, have a party and stuff. And but basically, you'd see a show, and then the show would end, and it'd still be echoing in your ears, and floors were humid, and there was just this kind of physicality about the whole thing, and wow, now it's gone. And I was thinking, well, fuck, someone needs to document this stuff. So that's where that started. I just started shooting bands, whole shows and stuff like that. And that was kind of my intention, was just, and at that point, there was no nonlinear editing. You couldn't just do things on your computer. I mean, if you actually ever wanted to edit it, it was quite an arduous process of tape to tape, and no one had, and there was no access to that sort of thing. So basically, I just felt like I was assembling moments for something. That was the general idea. But then as a filmmaker, I was always a little more snotty art film kind of, and felt like celluloid was so important and da-da-da. So in terms of what I wanted to make, all my visions were of like 16 millimeter black and white, reversal, like I had these ideas of what I wanted to make. And as far as what I liked, it was Tarkovsky and Chantal Ackerman, and just, not exactly rowdy stuff or whatever, but that was my aesthetic of, as far as the films I liked, and also the films I guess I imagined myself making. But then at some point, a friend pointed out that, well, you can make it on video. You can make a movie on video, and again, though, you had this barrier of, well, how do you get it from the tape to, because at least with film, you have a physical thing. Okay, I'm going to cut it here, kink, kink, and then and then you can actually hold it up and look at it. This is a film. I can see it right here, I mean, we'll have to put it on projector, but it's a film. Videotape is like, what is it, and it's in cartridges, and but that aside, basically just acquiring images. And then in University of Florida, there was other colleges would call it the Quad. I forget what we called it, but it's where the Hare Krishnas had lunch. We served lunch every day, and some crazy Christian evangelist would be talking to his crowd. It was just this very, dynamic kind of social environment. And that's where I brought up. I was talking to some skater kid, and who's in the credits, closing credits, Andrew Entner. I understand he passed away, actually, but anyway, he had this idea about a skateboard movie where the skater loses the trucks on his skateboard, but then drills his foot to it. And that really was the seed image. And I'm not ruining anything, right? This is after the movie. I already know about that, right? So it was, so that's kind of where it started. And basically, and I was all kind of maximum rock and roll, support the scene type shit. So I was like, great, let's use, and basically I've kind of put out to the scene, anyone who wants to contribute, come up with a character, either be willing to play it or, and let's just make this movie together. So it really was, to me, a real group experience of gathering energies and also encountering skeptics, and like, you're never going to make that movie, and, okay, and, so that's kind of how it evolved into a narrative. And then, two writer friends, Steve Anzac and James Bassett, I don't even know that I'm trying to remember were we even friends before this, but Steve and I were in a band. Anyway, but they fancied themselves writers. They are writers, actually, to this day. Steve is a published writer and all this kind of stuff. So they and I sat and I feel like it was 1 4-hour night, but maybe it was 2 or 3, but we just came up with the story, and okay. And like the mad scientist scene, that's my friend Chuck and Jen, and they were sitting on the lawn with, and well, we could play that. So I could be in that. That's great, and I was just, there were no no's. It was all, it was like improv, like, okay, mad scientist, fantastic, and that's kind of how it, and then once the elements, then you start codifying it into a script, and that's kind of how it began.
I mean, it totally vibes. I mean, the movie does have that really like fun kind of, we're putting on a show vibe to it, right? American/Aztec Blood, you shot on like digital, and then higher digital with Try Again. Do you like the aesthetics of the video stuff, or do you wish you could have shot them on film or a different format?
If it had been filmed, it wouldn't have happened. Because, think about it. I mean, 80 minutes that's the finished product was 80 minutes. I don't recall the ratio, I mean, like how many takes per, you take 5 takes and use one of them or whatever. I know that I think each tape was an hour tape, big VHS tape, and it was basically a stack this high, which sadly I got rid of. I had to at some point literally dump. But so I don't think it would have happened in film. And I mean, the thing is, finances more than anything, I think, and finances and time and all that kind of stuff. Your aesthetic choices are shaped by the limitations that you have. So, VHS in particular is grainy and shitty, and of course we love it. But for me, then I wanted to have at least decent light, have an edge, some things that would at least sharpen the VHS-ness of it, and very deliberate use of. So to answer your question, I mean, the intrinsic aesthetic of VHS in particular, I wanted to kind of fuck with color, I mean, things that maybe, you experiment and you fuck up or whatever, but, reds, red, you don't want to use too much red, because that's going to, so right away I was like, yeah, because it was a pugnacity, an aesthetic pugnacity, if you will, that also just kind of came with being in a punk milieu, like, well, fuck you, like, oh really? These are the rules? Well, fuck you, like that. So sometimes there are rules for a reason. And, but, I mean, with the VHS, I did tests, because this old RCA was marvelous in that, if you rack focus, you actually would get a nice depth of field. Like ever since like digital, they're all back focus. I'm not exactly sure, but the deal is that you couldn't get a good pull. You can't basically on normal, you can't get a nice pull focus, but you could on this VHS crazy thing, and it had a dial on the side more toward tungsten or toward sun, toward white light, and so you could make deliberate choices of let's make it a little redder or let's make it, which it's interesting that's not available to us generally now. But there's so much you can do in post now that it's just that's the thing. There's no post in that, right? There's no image manipulation. What you see is what you get, with VHS,
Well, I mean,
anyway, truthfully, life is long and my memory isn't. I'm not sure. I mean, I can remember statements to myself or statements I, declaimed to others. Well, what? I mean, I know with Twisted Issues, I was cutting it on that TV that I targeted the TV that is in the movie, Twisted Issues. That was I wanted to look good on that TV.
Oh, so that was to cut the tapes together?
I mean, I had a friend who let me use his setup. So he actually had a slightly better, I mean, actually a real setup. And it wasn't like huge screens. It was back in the day, so it was still like this. Mm-hmm. Possibly even smaller, but a higher quality kind of thing. But I guess what I'm saying as far as the targeted audience, me, initially, I wanted it to look good on that screen. So how's that going to happen? Well, one thing I kind of threw out the making of is high BSI. What's that? A friend of mine was like, blood saturation index? And I'm like, no, blood per square inch of screen. Because I wanted, so I mean, that was a deliberate, aesthetic desire to have, because red, because I usually a painter, so red is a stirring color, and so especially it was intended, once I made the decision that, okay, it's going to be more than a documentary, then, but I have to be honest. I mean, I read incredibly strange films. I researched Herschel Gordon Lewis, Reagan Steckler, certain, and then I just already like things like Return of the Living Dead and of course Suspiria and all that great stuff. But I guess I'm saying that I went in very deliberately. I wanted to have a lot of splatter. I wanted to have most scenes have, and even if there wasn't blood, then a nice orange light,
You said you were a painter beforehand, and I've seen some of what I presume is your artwork from when I bought your DVDs, and you get those amazing postcards that come with it. So did you start as a painter, or did you go to school for it, or were you just doing it in general in your spare time?
I was an art student. Yeah, I went to art school, and my idea was to be, I think, initially an illustrator. I have two friends who are successful illustrators, a guy named Tom Kidd and a guy named John Berard. They were like older kids that when I was like 15, I met them, and they kind of rescued me from being a miserable 15-year-old. And they're the ones who actually exposed me to. We'd go to the drive-in, and this is in Florida now. Drive-in. There's a thing at the University of South Florida called Head Theater, which started at midnight, and that's where you have Pink Flamingos, Mako Naima, just various, to my 15-year-old eyes, and pre any kind of, these guys were, sober kids. They weren't these older guys. They were like not partiers or whatever, but so it was definitely like sober fascination with, crazy imagery and stuff like that. And then seeing, I always mention that seeing The Tenant, like at age 17, Roman Polanski, The Tenant, really, just had a huge effect on just my aesthetic as far as what a movie can be, because as an American, you just sort of get this idea that there's heroes and they're always in the center of the frame, and and with with The Tenant, which I assume you're familiar with The Tenant, like he.
If I am familiar with it, yes.
That when he goes out, I'm gonna show them, and then he comes back with a dress and a wig, and he's okay, like that was his defining, the idea that this could be the hero, the protagonist of a movie. It just really more than anything speaks to my limited exposure to movies at that point. But Lieutenant was the one that was just like, oh my, and all the use of red and so many layers of the whole Egyptian thing, and that's just a marvelous, great movie anyway.
I mean, well, it actually plays into the question I was going to ask later, but I might as well ask it now. Because you talk about some movies that you were into and inspired you, especially The Tenant. I think especially when people talk about We Awake, they often talk about it like in the context of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Do you have like a canon? Like, were you inspired by the canon, like a horror canon, like other than The Tenant? Where there's this, you mentioned Chantal Ackman earlier as well, but pushing for like the more genre stuff. Were you ever thinking specifically like, I'm going to rip on this kind of movie, or do you just have some specific horror touchstones that you ever were looking at and thinking about?
I think that the horror touchstone sounds right. I mean, and again, age 15, maybe it was a little later than 15, that I saw Texas Chainsaw Massacre for the first time in a drive-in with my older brother, my younger brother. I had no idea I don't remember the television as. I might be just not remembering, but I had no idea what I was getting into. And basically, that was a movie that I was just like, oh my God, like there's no rules. They killed the guy in the wheelchair. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know. I mean, I just was like, and then, the first time the person gets hung on the hook, it was just like, I just remember driving, my brother, we were driving away and me just thinking, no movie has ever gone that far. No movie could go any further. Like that movie blew my mind. That Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So I would almost consider that so part of the inner rung of my aesthetic that. But yes, there are some. I mean, and Killbillies. I'm sorry, We Await was originally something called Killbillies, and that was something I shot a bunch of Super 8. I say it with sadness because it never happened. We spent 3 weekends making this movie called Killbillies. That I don't have the film, I'm sure it's in a dumpster somewhere, and we shot reversal, so it's literally not, it doesn't exist anymore, I guess, but, and Killbillies was set in a rural environment and was overtly derivative or inspired or whatever of, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but with this other aspect where, like, Barrett, the character that I ended up playing in the We Away, was actually, he was played by the big dumb brother in Red Spirit Lake. Just geographically, some kind of group of people and group of friends. So that guy played Barrett. I just directed Hillbillies. I'm trying to think who else might have been in it. But anyway, it was a serious effort at an independent film in like 1990. So at the same time, like say, Sex, Lies, and Videotape came out. It was definitely this time, like. And too bad it never got made. But basically, fast forward to San Francisco, we'd already made Red Spirit Lake, and then, and by we, I mean me and my wife at the time, and so, what do you want? And she goes, well, you've already got that script lying around. And she kind of, if we weren't together, she kind of knew that I was trying to get this movie made, the Killbillies. And so that became We Await. Taking that script, that feature script, stripping out some of the subplots and characters and stripping away the rural environment. So then it became kind of a Texas Chainsaw Massacre in the Mission District of San Francisco. And some said that they found that even creepier because it means they could be living next door. That was one of the responses I got. Was because the one that with the Killbillies it was rural. It was in rural New Jersey and forest and beautiful setting, but a sense of isolation. We Await, I made a point in We Await, you're always hearing cars and neighbors and music and, the environment of the city.
You make twist issues. How do you distribute it? Like, how does it get out there?
Twisted Issues, I mean, once I had things that, the editing was arduous. It's not that interesting a story, but it was an arduous process of, having frame accurate editing on one side, which was the 3/4 inch U-matic tape that was the master, but coming from VHS and where you didn't have frame accuracy. So I liken it to like, cause you could have your target on this side, but then you were sort of pitching a horseshoe to get the right moment. So that, that just created a whole. And the thing is, because it's not linear, you have to actually start from the beginning. And so I got as far as the kid getting killed, run over at the beginning, before he became a skate monster. And I realized the scene was going too long. It was too slow. The bad guys and pouring the beer in his head and all that stuff. And it was just this like, oh my God. And so I took it all the way back to the earliest part I could and had to re-edit it. And anyone who's worked in the old school, that's what you had to do. You didn't really have these options, because you don't want to deal with generation loss. You can't cut what you've cut the way you can with digital. Oh my God, because then it'd be another generation. So, all right, let's go back. So pitching horseshoes to get me through that scene. But it also, it gave you a little more of a ruthlessness and a kind of, so anyway, so how to get it distributed. So then I had this object, and I don't remember actually how it all started, but basically ended up with it was a baggie. It was a baggie. It's largest Ziploc with the VHS tape, a cassette, soundtrack, because I didn't really want to push the music. I wanted to emphasize the music, and a little booklet full of drawings and who was in it, and script, storyboards with, you can see, it was kind of a cool little artifact of the whole thing. And so that, and I'd send it out for $15. That was postage paid, So, I mean, I think when Film Prep first came out, they gave it a really good review, and I think that kind of got the ball rolling as far as, because I think back then, you send it to get reviewed. So I would send it. I mean, I thought I was like, I'm a genius because I'll send it to the punk rock fanzines, and I'll send it to the horror Fangorias and stuff. Of course, they all ignored. Most of them ignored the movie, on the horror side, except for, say, Film Threat, who actually, I mean, I gotta give them props. I mean, they really gave, as I recall, the first good review.
What,
a lot of snot.
Fangoria and like kind of more all those horror mags ignored it. Like what put them off about it, do you think?
Video.
It was just the video.
I mean, I don't know, but because actually this guy who is now the editor of Fangoria, Michael Gingold, he had a zine called Scaraphernalia, I think is what it's called, and he gave actually a wonderful review of Twisted Issues, but it was like a little Xerox zine. Mm-hmm. And then years later when they were like, wait, and he was already moving up the, ignored, and that's kind of a larger story of how video was basically, you could shoot a documentary on video, because videos, it lends itself to that, and that could maybe get into a film festival. There was a whole period where you couldn't get into a film festival with video, just full stop. Has to be 16. It says so right on the thing. Has to be 16. Chicago Underground Film Festival was the first one that I encountered that said cinema is cinema, and by definition, cinema is montage of images and so on. So format doesn't matter. And they were the first ones that they took Ritzger Lake, and that was just that was, oh my god, because you really got to, because New York Film Festival, a lot of these. I don't want to say they're snobby. I mean, maybe they're just. I mean, but I know I was snobby about film before I made a movie on video. So there was just this idea that aesthetically, video looks like shit and film doesn't. But also from a point of view of, if you have the money to make a film, that was my thing. I couldn't afford to make a fucking film. I wouldn't have made an 80-minute skateboard gore movie on film. I mean, I don't, but the beautiful thing about video, and now more than ever, I suppose, is there are no gatekeepers. Mm-hmm. I mean, there are tons of gatekeepers, but as far as you making the thing, you don't have to interact with anyone with money. You don't have to. You can make whatever you want. It might languish, but it's yours,
It exists. And that's so fascinating as well, because now video, I guess only the last 5 years or so, has gotten an interest again, but in a point where no one's making movies on video anymore. But I bought a book a couple months ago, which is called Analog Nightmares, which is all just about shot video stuff. And they're only building the canon now. And it's so sad because the canon could have started to be built 30 years ago.
Yeah. I have that book too. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, good book. Oh, dog.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, dogs. Adorable.
My life, the meaning of my life.
Oh, they're so cute.
Yeah. They're pretty awesome.
Oh.
Well.
Anyway,
they let themselves in. I believe I closed the door, but
I saw one from that show. It was amazing. This is I thought I distracted. I love them so much. I couldn't talk about Sean Diego.
I screwed with your sequence. I screwed your sequence. So that's how it got out. It got out through Film Threat and a couple good reviews, and then it was just mail order and then Maximum Rock and Roll, I think, did a decent review. High Times actually did a great review with colored, slick color paper. So there were some cool.
There's some cool people out there who got it.
Yeah. And then I got it into some video stores, and I guess that's another way to,
Not a thing that can happen anymore, I guess, unfortunately.
But I know.
Tragic, your audience, did that end up leading to Red Spirit Lake anyway? Did you get any attention? Was there any funding coming in, or was it just you ended up in the right place at the right time and just made another movie?
I mean, truthfully, funding has never been in the picture, except maybe with American Mummy. And then actually, yes, definitely with American Mummy. 3D movies in the desert. I mean, it actually had, I had a producer, and the guy who plays the Russian, he was the producer and creator of American Mummy.
He's very funny that way. He's great. So there's no like, it's not like Twisted Issues gets you the attention of some like bigwig with some spare change. So how does the lake come out? So you mentioned when you're making Trend Like Hillbillies that had a lot of rural stuff in it, and Red Spirit Lake is all shot in like, looks like the middle of nowhere. Like,
right.
Did you say Hillbillies was starting to be shot before Red Spirit Lake, or did I mishear you? Yes.
Red Spirit Lake in its own way was sort of a reaction to the endless attempts at fundraising, taking meetings. I mean, all this stuff that I realized is important to getting a movie made, but is probably why I've never had a real success in that field, because some people have an ability to do that. I don't know. Because I recall this, because you meet with investors and have drinks and blah blah blah, and this one guy, I love the script very much. Instead of Killbillies, what if we called it Cannibal Family? And that's the level of kind of idiot I was at that point. Well, no, it has to be, it has to be Killbillies, like that's kind of just, well, I have all the money and I say it could be called, but I didn't, I mean, now I would, well, now I'm not even trying to make movies anymore, to be honest, but, yeah, I mean, now I'd say, oh, well, it sounds really great. Campbell's Family? Yeah, I like that, I don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I feel like
it's sort of like the way bands break up because they argue about the name of the band, and then fuck that, and then suddenly you've lost sense of the music at all, and kind of, I mean, it was a ridiculous thing to be concerned about. Call it whatever you want. The movies, anyway.
Well, in the end, this led to, so you ended up reacting to your attempts to make this, and then you ended up with Red Spirit Lake, which is also amazing. Right. Within that, you also have a bunch of Cinema of Transgression players like Richard Kern. I have the note here. I have Annabelle Davies, Canberra Fowler. I'm saying this more for the audience who's watching right now, but you end up hanging out with those guys. I mean, the scene with Richard Kern, which I won't necessarily spoil, his death scene is like unbelievably it's amazing. Like, and that seems like totally in their wheelhouse. How did you end up hanging out with them, getting in the movie? Were they fans of Twisted Issues?
Richard was. There was a place in New York called See Here, CHEAR. That was a zine store. Imagine that. That's a complete little storefront that all it did was sell zines and the occasional obscure videos and whatever. And Richard, I'd stop in and See Here periodically, and initially I brought Twisted Issues. Hey, you want to? Oh, sure, and very welcoming kind of scene. As far as they put in that little thing next, and it was right next to Send It to Me Now or whatever, and the various cool, and then another time I came in, well, because it's commission, do I sell any, and no, but Richard Kern, I let him borrow a copy, and he really liked it, so he'd like to meet you, so that to me was just like, because of Film Threat and so on, and I just moved to New York from Florida, so I was like, it just felt like this, Richard Kern wants to meet me, and I, went to his apartment and, and so that's kind of how that initial kind of friendship happened, and actually through Richard, I met Annabelle, who then I was married to for a while, and we collaborated on these two movies, Red Spirit Lake and Wait Wait. So, and so that's kind of how that scene happened, because I met Annabelle because Richard was roommates with Annabelle. So that's this small world stuff, and then we wrote. I mean, I think as much as anything, I think Annabelle was the one who said, Charles, make a movie. Fuck this, meeting with investors. Make a movie. So that's and her mom had a place in Vermont, so that's kind of where we shot the. And basically kind of lived there for 2 or 3 months, during the early part of '93, I guess, and periodically a trainload of New York deviants would show up and we'd shoot for few days. They'd go back to New York, and I would shoot a bunch of, and then we'd just shoot the scenes that are just Annabelle solo or me solo. We were the only ones there, so she would shoot my scenes, I would shoot her scenes. Some of them we'd set up the thing and, beg your pardon?
So picture on Elizabeth Lake where it's just you trying to get one shot. I think it's if you climbing
Right.
up like a hill, things like breaking. Yeah, so that's just you too, just filming all the.
Yeah.
That's it.
And probably half the movie was shot that way, like just the two of us, hey, looks beautiful. And a lot of it was just grabbing shots,
Mm-hmm.
crisscross of contrails in the sky, to kind of echo the thing on the forehead. And
like smoke window, yeah.
Yeah. Because to me, a lot of it's just about grabbing images. I mean, even now, like I'm grabbing images all the time for something, but I don't know what it's for necessarily,
So you made Elizabeth Lake, and are you happy with the product once it's done? Like it feels more of like a controlled, purposeful object than Twisted Issues.
Yes, yeah, it definitely was. I should actually though. I didn't really realize this until I was reminded of it. There is a movie called Nettle Noir.
Nettle
Noir, Noir. That there's a guy named Tony Mazziello who has a thing called SOV horror. He's a youngish guy who's released it. He just released it within the last year. That movie, I'd made Twisted Issues. I moved to New York. Had the age of zines. I always had a little zine called Twisted Tissues, which actually preceded Twisted Issues. But anyway, people I'd exchanged stuff with, and this guy, I did some covers for a guy who did a zine called Festering Grains. Okay, this guy in Buffalo. And then it turns out he wanted to make a movie. His name's David Williams. He wanted to make a movie. So I went up to Buffalo from New York to be in this movie called Nettle Noir. And this was in like 1989 or something like that. And then nothing kind of came of it. I didn't hear about it. And then literally 2 or 3 years ago, Tony just released it this year. Yeah. And it's about a lady. I played this ghost or whatever, that mad crazy guy. It's an amusing SOV movie for sure. But the plot is this lady buys a house or is given a house to stay in to be a writer, and all these things happen to her. Until I just saw that a few months ago, I didn't realize. I think that was the seeds of Red Spirit Lake.
Oh, interesting.
This woman isolated, and shit happens to her. I mean, that's about it as far as like what actually happens. And with Red Spirit Lake, there was a more deliberate template of male and female energy, and the witches in the lake and stuff, and then sort of the bad guys and all the. I think there's just different stuff going on in Red Spirit Lake, but I have to say that with humility or just accuracy. I think that did affect the narrative. So anyway, the way it was written was Red Spirit Lake was tag team style, pretty much. Like me and Annabelle. So basically, we kind of had an idea of what the thing was, but then I would write for a while, and then we did the thing with plotting it on the 3x5 cars and stuff, and this happens, and and having these let's and then you can shuffle the cards. What if this happens earlier and all that kind of stuff. But also deliberately with Red Spirit Lake, I had read somewhere some Hollywood guy, I don't remember the name, but saying every movie needs to have blamos every few minutes, blamos of some kind, and so that was kind of our thing, it goes, somebody takes their shirt, that's a blamo, or things happen. So that's why I think Red Spirit Lake has a kind of unusual structure, because it seems like it kind of ends and then it begins again, and then the friends show up. I don't want to give anything away, but it goes through its. I don't know if it's anything remotely like a 3-act structure. Maybe someone can find it. I've actually never quite understood the whole 3-act structure thing. But anyway, so Red Spirit Lake meanders along with blamos. That's kind of how, but we're getting to the scene where something sexually disturbing happens, and then Annabelle, I'll break that part. Honestly, some of the more transgressive stuff was more her than me. but plus she was in several Richard Kern, or at least two Richard Kern pieces, you know. So there's that whole, the time lent itself to a lot of just the desire to transgress, you know.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Do you remember who came up with the idea for it? I won't spoil it, but I'll just
Right.
The fisting.
Yeah. I want to put like a black tape over here. That I honestly, that I'm not sure, you know, because what's interesting is around that time, research publications, are you familiar with that? San Francisco based. They did like one on industrial culture. They did one on Burroughs. They did one on Ballard. It's this whole, and they did Incredibly Strange Films. That's that big book called Incredibly Strange Films. Okay, yeah. San Francisco based. Anyway, Lydia Lunch was in one of them called Angry Women, and so there was. I mean, I wouldn't say Red Spirit Lake is an intellectual movie, but there was a lot of stuff going on culturally and conversations about reversing the gaze. You know, am I a woman being looked at, or am I going to turn back and look at you, looking at me? You know, and the point being that I don't know if you've seen a Richard Kern movie called The Bitches. Richard shot the first part of that movie as we were shooting Red Spirit Lake, and then as after the fisting scene. Sorry guys, you got to see Red Spirit Lake. They won't ruin it for you. But after that scene, and then having conversations about the angry women and reversing the gaze and all this kind of stuff, he calls me and says, "You know, Charles, we're not finished yet. I realize that movie needs something," because he actually screened it as was, and it just kind of ends his movie. And I think it was evident that, okay, this is like a loop. It doesn't really, and then we did Red Spirit Lake, and then that scene, and then he, in The Bitches, he gets me back, if you will, for what happened. So, I mean, it's interesting just, you know, two guys, but it's also interesting, I think, in terms of just a dialogue about, like, art talking to art, you know. Sometimes it just talks, when you're a painter, sometimes a painting talks back to you, you know, you're like, oh, you know, like you think you're doing the talking, and then suddenly the painting's talking back to you, and you're like, oh.
So Red Spirit Lake comes out, and then how do you? And so you shoot that. You're in New York, but it's shot in Vermont, but it's in the New York scene, and then you go to San Francisco. How did you end up in San Francisco from there?
Annabelle went to graduate school in San Francisco, so that was kind of the suddenly we're in a new place, and I wanted to make another movie. And that's when she said, "Well, we have this, you know, the script to Killbillies." And then an interesting, idea of like, well, how come? But it's set in the country, you know. That was my boneheaded initial. Well, I don't know, how can that work, you know? Is not the isolation part of the story, or is it, or you know? And then you just start distilling it down to, well, what is the story about? Maybe it's not about isolation. I mean, you know, the isolation is a context for Killbillies, Texas Chainsaw, you know, but what about, so that, and then I saw a performance of the band Chrome, Chrome, and Genesis George was playing with them. And, you know, sometimes you just get into these fugue states while you're listening to music, you know, you're taking in the music, but you're not necessarily there, you know, and that's when We Await. The title, We Await, you know, I mean, because we can't call it Killbillies if it's set in San Francisco, because, you know, and then suddenly, I don't know, then it just started from that title, the propulsion and purpose and what are we waiting? It just became kind of an interesting dialogue of like, wait, you know, what are we waiting for, you know? And so that's kind of the essence of how that, I guess, began, you know. And plus, we already had the script, and this is just a map of.
Did you have to like modify it much, or did you essentially just like push more urban elements into it and take some of the world stuff out?
You know, it actually didn't really. I don't recall making any changes, like additions, so much as, you know, in the Hillbillies, there's this rural area, so there's a small town nearby with cops, and these cops are kind of comical, you know, because they weren't really cops, they were mailmen because the cops had been arrested for mail fraud. There's some silly stuff, and so suddenly they were mail carriers, but they were also cops. You know, it seemed funny at the time. Anyway, that didn't work for this urban context. There were a couple of TV reality show producers who were victims of Barrett, the murderous son. You know, they were part of the accumulated. There was anyway. All that was gone. All that was. You know, there's like a junkyard where basically all the cars because the whole premise of Killbillies, one of the things was people traveling through this remote area would get. He actually used a crossbow. And there's this whole series of movies called Wrong Turn that I have to think somehow Killbillies script crossed their lap at some point because that's actually the premise of Killbillies is this. But that happens, and because we did actually, you know, when we were trying to make it seriously after the 16mm version, that's when it really just got ugly, and because we're talking 35mm, and I'm having to tell actors who worked very hard on the 16 that we're trying to get a name for this role, and you know, and it was horrible. I mean, it was just horrible on a personal level and stuff like that. So basically, no, I mean, it's a solid little, and you know, We Wait is only 55 minutes long, so it's just this, and you know, and at that point also I was in this whole, you know, why does a movie have to be 2 hours? Why does it have to be, you know, I was very much like, why do we need this scene? I mean, why do we need these obligatory, I mean, now I realize, well, they're kind of necessary. They're just things, cogs, you do this there, then that brings that there, you know. But I was just sort of like thinking there is a perfect length of a film, and it's about 47 minutes. That goes in my head. Like you can have a feature with everything that you want from a feature in about 47 minutes, and that seemed very important to me. I don't know why. And I kept thinking that with each one, because Twisted is just 80 minutes, Red Sport Lake 69 minutes, just by accident, and then We Await's 55. So, you know, I didn't quite get that braille length, but I just felt, to me, We Await feels like a full movie. It doesn't need any longer, you know. So, and part of it is because it took a 110-page script and just condensed it to, you know, 50 pages or something. And
I have a question actually that I don't want to take credit for because I think it's a good question. And my partner, Lucinda, was the one who came up with it. And I'm going to quote it specifically so I don't get it wrong. So Twisted Issues and We Await both work as kind of like mini portraits of their respective locations. You get a really sense of Gainesville in the former and San Francisco in the latter. Do you think that, I mean, I assume Gainesville definitely did, but do you think San Francisco like influenced We Await? Especially because like We Await feels like kind of a portrait of a San Francisco that doesn't really exist anymore.
right.
Yeah. Do you find, did you think that those, like San Francisco really like imprinted itself on We Await? Do you think like We Await could
Absolutely.
be made now?
I mean, I don't mean to be obtuse. I mean, the thing is, it's set in the Mission, and to me, it looks like the Mission. I mean, you know, because, you know, I make movies for nothing, and they're definitely cast with my friends and all that kind of stuff. You know, I mean, again, American Mummy, no. I mean, American Mummy, these are strangers in the film, except for the Russian. And, but basically everybody else, they're friends. Hey, how about such and such, you know, and they're ready-mades as well. So, for example, the guy in We Await, spoiler, with a wrench hanging from his penis while he's being blowtorched. Yeah. He was into that. You know, that was his thing. So that, you know, so if you find ready-mades, then put them in a movie. You know, you find interesting people, let's put them in a movie, you know, find a reason for him to be in this movie, you know. And so, and again, the woman with the blowtorch, her name is Simone. She was a performer. I don't know her stat. I haven't seen her in a long time, but she went by the performing name Simone Third Arm. And it was San Francisco. I assume San Francisco is as deviant as ever. I'm not sure without affordable places to live. I don't know where the deviants live now, but you know, she had this performance with basically this kind of dildo on a turn. She turned it on, and I think she fucked herself with it. And so, I mean, you know, there's a lot of interesting, fringy characters in San Francisco. So, and Winston Smith who did all the great collage art for Dead Kennedys. He plays the Christian dude that gets killed at the beginning of the movie with a hat, and the wardrobe is provided by Joel Biafra. So I mean, there is the Dead Kennedys. So there is. I just feel like it's definitely imbued with its locality, and even though in Red Lake's case it was shot in Vermont, as you noted, it's a bunch of Cinema of Transgression people tossed stuff into Vermont, and I think one reason why, in some respects, they really are fish out of water. Some of these people were total urban people, and they're like, wow, we're in the,
I was gonna ask you about the blue screen sequence in We Await, but I actually kind of don't want to spoil it. I just want to get through it by the DVD.
Okay.
But I will just say briefly, what was it? I mean, it's amazing. Was it conceived separately? I mean, Massacre Lake DVD, it is its own little special feature. Was that like just kind of a psychedelic sequence you had images for, and then you figured a way to
it was actually part of Killbillies, and it's actually the seed of Killbillies is a scene that, again, a friend of mine, a guy named George in Gainesville, his music, he does odd music. His music is the opening part of Massacre Lake. Anyway, he had this idea, the title Killbillies, and the seed image or moment, whatever it is, this rural family of cannibals. They have this. It's in the boondocks. It's in the remote areas, not San Francisco. They have a big car on blocks, which is a kind of I don't know if it's in Australia, but it's kind of a archetype of sort of rural poverty. We can't afford tires anymore. We still have the car. We have it on blocks, and when we can afford tires, we can put tires on it. But basically, it's just sitting on blocks. It can't go anywhere. And the family, I think his idea was they take mushrooms. Like I turned whatever it is they took into a part of the story and of this crystal, maybe it's alien, whatever the fuck it is. But so what happens is they take the mushrooms and then they get into the car, and then the car drives off like a ghost bird, leaving this one there. And it was just a wonderful image, and unfortunately never got to do it, but the car drives off, and then the journey begins, and it actually was. They see Jesus, they see the Buddha, but the Buddha was more of a joke because there was a very popular book in the 70s called "If You Meet the Buddha on the Road, Kill Him," okay. And that is the source of that thought. Like, because I think what actually happened, they I don't remember anything, but they do what they do with Jesus, and then they're driving along, and then they see the Buddha. And that's like the culminating, but so that's the source of that. And it actually, I would say it's the earliest seed of Killbillies, that scene.
Yeah. Yeah, because that does really say, I mean, it's a classic whole thing of the Await. You don't have to answer this, obviously, too personal, but especially The Await and that's like to a certain extent, and also Portal Armageddon, have an interesting relationship with faith. I mean, like We Await feels like very much. I mean, I kept thinking of that the Genesis song, "Jesus He Knows Me," when I was watching it. Like, it feels very critical. I mean, do you have like a competitive relationship with religion, or is that just something you just want to explore with that specific work?
My grandfather on my mom's side was a lay minister, Methodist lay minister, big tall man, booming voice, terrifying as a kid. He was very, spoil the rats, spare the child, and we'd have to sit around and when we'd visit, and we'd all take turns, just a part of the Bible and pass it. Chucky, and I'd be all scared because I'm afraid I'm going to read it wrong, and that's the first. I think what he was trying to do was, instill in us certain archetypes, like if your eye offends, you tear it out. I remember the moment. I think I was the one that did it. Like, eye offends, so certainly it's there in my history, and then on my dad's side, his mother was a Baptist. So the character of Matthias in Red Spirit Lake is definitely me and my religious upbringing, writ large and deformed and stretched and whatever, including the demons, and whacking off and so on, like that's. So there's definitely in my family as a history, as a as a seeking person, I guess I consider myself a Gnostic as far as just continuing to explore and find out. And I did live on an ashram for a while in the 70s, and I don't know if any of that stuff is foregrounded or not, but it's just sort of I feel like I'm in constant dialogue with these ideas. The jury is still out, and no doubt will be out. So I'm out. I mean, I have no convictions about that realm really. I mean, love is good. And being nice to people is good. I mean, you can attract bees with honey more than vinegar, and so on. And, sure.
All right, so We Awake comes out, and you end up working in the porn industry under the pseudonym Charlie Crow. I unfortunately have not seen Archer's Last Day yet, but I have seen Porn Armageddon. It's very fun, and I know they showed those as part of the retrospective they did of your work with Spectacle Theater. Was that right? Spectacle Theater were they the ones who did? Yeah.
Yeah.
Did you enjoy working in that side of the industry? Like, was that everything you were ever interested in, or was it purely like some guy was like, hey, here's some money to make movies?
The guy who played Jesus in We Awake was my coworker at a place called Screw Magazine in New York City, which was, predating the internet and predating. It was a time when escorts could not advertise in the Village Voice, or any place. So Screw Magazine was the place that if you're like coming in from Omaha for the weekend, you get your Screw Magazine, and here, I can have sex with a transsexual, they're the little ads. So we worked there. He was a brilliant writer. He passed away a few years ago. Novelist and so on, musician. But he also worked at Screw Magazine, and I worked at Screw Magazine, and we became friends. And he, big fat guy, he had a definite interest in porn, interest in the sex industry, arguably because that's where he could actually have sex, and stuff like that. He didn't really have conventional relationships. So he came out of San Francisco shortly after I did. He got involved in the S&M scene there. We actually shot some softcore stuff that exists somewhere. And then he moved to LA. But see, the thing is, we were always, well, this isn't porn. We're doing softcore, because it was softcore. It wasn't porn. It was porn so mundane and normal, So, but then he got lured down. And then it was right around the time of the dot-com boom and financial rents going up, and he's down in LA going, I'm making lots of money in porn business, man. Why don't you come down? And he was selfish because he wanted me to shoot for him, which I used to do, and edit and all that kind of stuff. And so that's kind of how I got in it. I'd worked with him for a long time, and then I split off from him to do my own, under my own name and stuff like that. So but I think it's reflected in the work that this is not porn anyone really wants to jerk off to. I mean, that's kind of, and in fact, that's kind of why I got out of it, because I felt like I'm not a good ally to the masturbator, I'm fucking with your head rather than helping you,
Yeah, I mean, honestly, that's the point. That's the kind of point that's held up the most now, right? Like, no one's seeking out like the purely jerk off material. Now people seek out the weird, like the Roger Watkins material. That is right. Going to fuck with your head. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, in Porn Armageddon, there's a thing in that movie that it has in a few of your movies. American Mummy, that, it happens in Try Again, which I just watched this morning, which is people spitting colored substances out of their mouths.
Yeah.
I'm sure it probably pops up in your first two movies. Well, those are just the ones I watched most recently. Is there a reason that pops up a lot? Is that a conscious thing that you're just like, gotta have another guy or silver or like white out of his mouth?
I know it's funny, Try Again, when he starts spitting out the blue, my girlfriend, partner now, who produced that one, she was like, now it looks like one of your movies with the blue stuff that's coming out, you know. So, I mean, I don't know how conscious, I mean, I like color. I like, I mean, I think it goes back to just color and video VHS kind of stuff can be so pallid. You know, you actually have to work hard, I think, to get, to make VHS and that sort of thing not feel brown and murky. You know, you do kind of have to work at it to get some color in there. Red's Great Lake too, all the blue light and red light, you know, that's all very deliberate. So I think I like color. The mouth stuff, I don't know. I honestly don't know.
It's great. It pops out. I thought as soon as I saw him try again, I was like, aha! Well, let's go briefly back to that. Okay, so you worked in the porn business for a bit, because you were not, in your words, a good outlet of masturbators. And then there's radio silence for a while. Were you burnt out? Were you trying to get stuff made? Were you just like floating around? Like, what was happening in that field?
I was trying to get, there's something called Thousand Eyes that I wrote in my last part of being in San Francisco that still I can imagine making. I mean, it was a small movie. It was actually intended to be a 16 millimeter black and white tone poem. That's all. You know, it was like 60 pages long. It wasn't meant to be a feature. It was just something I wanted to do in San Francisco, and I really wanted to do it in black and white video. And then I actually thought I'd do it on film, and then I was like, well, because back then there still was, you could still. I mean, if you're not Quentin Tarantino, it's kind of hard to make a film movie these days, but there was still at the crossroads where people were still making film, and high def hadn't really quite of asserted itself, and so that was important. But then once I came to LA, I actually moved back to LA. I left and moved back, and to make Thousand Eyes, you know, and you know, met someone who's a good friend now who he just came on to doctor it to make it go from 60 pages to 90 pages. So it feels like a feature. There are certain things, character stuff that, because I don't really care that much about exposition or explication or, you know, to me, because I'm still a painter in the sense that, well, look at it and what do you think? You know, but you know, if you're having a script and a narrative, and so this guy just kind of, well, why is he doing it? You know, and it would bum me out that I have to fucking think about this stuff, but you know, so made it a little bit more conventional. Came really close to getting made. I actually didn't want to make it the way this guy wanted to make it. This producer, totally different person, and so it didn't happen. Which I mean, I guess I probably would have been. Frank Henenlotter said you'd have been better off making it and making it badly than not making it at all. And sadly, I think he's right. But at the time, I was just it was akin to the no, it's got to be called Killbillies. I was like, I got in my own way. I tripped over my own. I don't want to do it that way, you know, and so it never happened, you know. So that one, and so, but you know, you spend time doing that and rewriting and having meetings and all that kind of stuff. I did edit shot part of a documentary about a guy from a band called the Flat Duo Jets, Dexter Romweber, who was there's a movie called Athens In Out from the late '80s that he's in as a young man. Our documentary was 10, 20 years later, where he's kind of an old, you know, the road has been hard on him. Beautiful musician, still great musician, still great performer. So I did that, and that took a couple of years, you know. So I mean, it wasn't like the time was empty. And then I was also, so after I moved to Hawaii for a couple of years, to around 2000. My brother lived there, and he just invited me, him and his wife, and they just had this 4-month-old, and I was feeling very disconnected in LA, and I was like, sure, you know. So I lived there for 2 years, edited wedding videos there. So like, there's not things you can point out. Oh, here's an artifact of, you know, but I definitely wasn't, you know, I wasn't. I mean, for a while I lived in this 4,000 feet on Mount Haleakala, and just sort of in a cabin and with a cat and macadamia nuts lumping on the roof every so often, you know, from the trees. And it was a refractory time or something, you know. But then actually, strangely enough, then I said, well, I want to go back to LA because I need energy and stuff. And so that kind of brought me back. And then I actually got back, and there's 2 other don't know if I sent you, I left porn rather dramatically, and then I came back again to the same employers and did 2 more movies. And then Apocalypse Babylon and, the other title, Black Angel Falls. And, yeah. That title, I wanted to do a porn sequel to Red Spirit Lake called Black Angel Falls, because Angel Falls is where they live in Red Spirit Lake, and never happened. But anyway, because I thought, well, I mean, the great thing about doing an adult feature was you really only need about 15, 20 pages of script, and then there's a requisite number of sex scenes you have to have. So that actually, initially I loved that, because I was like, and that's also why the sex scenes are perfunctory, at least in terms of my direction of them, because I didn't really care about that part of it,
So you leave porn, you go back to porn, make Black Angel Falls, and then how did you end up getting to American Mommy / Aztec Blood?
Greg, who plays the Russian, I knew him from that business. In fact, I shot he was a director too, named Gary Sage, S-A-G-E, I think was his. He actually went to Cannes, and, I guess they have an adult section there, and yeah, I mean, he's a real camera guy, film guy. He shot, and actually the Russian guy shot Try Again. And same guy who played the Russian guy. Yeah. We're old friends. We're old friends. And every time, he's shooting some sort of Q&A on the, he did some he used to work for Canon, so he'd do these Canon training videos, and I'd edit those for him. These are just bread and butter stuff, him in front of a black. Now, when you do the white balance, you'll notice that, it was just these training DVDs, for these specific models of Canon. And so one day he just said, hey, let's meet, we meet and have coffee. And what do you think about doing a movie called American Mummy? And I was like, well, surely that name has been taken by now. And he said, no, I've looked. No, really. Because there was already American Zombie and, really. So this would have been like 2004. The movie came out in 2014. So, and at the time, I think, they're making HD camcorders. Like, it was like this new, yet another threshold in consumer, I mean, he had access to really professional stuff, but why don't we make a run and gun movie? And he knew from my work, both adult and non-adult, that I can make a movie for no money. And that was kind of the thing, how can we, so that was so then there was like, well, what's it, well, so we went through a bunch of different, because I was like thinking maybe more of a Cronenbergian thing. I mean, there is a little bit of that, the idea of a viral entity, sentient viral entity. But we're like, well, what is an American? Well, Native American. We had this whole idea that you'd be a Native American. But mine was a much more amorphous sort of notion. He's really big on research and that. So he did a bunch of research. He came back, not an American, because I just had sort of generic Native American. Somebody got infected. They buried him back in the 1870s or whatever, and or longer or whatever. And then someone dug it up, and to me that seemed like this was a very straightforward genre thing of what have we got in leash? But then he's like, no, I've been doing this research about this guy, Polka, this Mexican, this Aztec deity, so he had these big books and, sort of treatises and, okay, so I let him do all that stuff. So because I would have chosen a color that I wanted on the mask. He said, no, the mask has to be, and he'd have to show me research and see this lapis lazuli and So long story short, that's where it started, and we almost made it in 2006. So like 2 years later, and we were going to live in the tents. I was probably going to be in it. It would have been a really fun, more of my other movies. Just we're all okay. Let's go to sleep and let's get up tomorrow and do it again and shoot it in 10 days and so on. And just as we were about to make it, literally like weeks before, I don't know what happened, but something happened economically, and because it was going to be his money, boom, couldn't do it anymore. Something happened, so it just lay fallow until maybe 2000. I guess we shot it in 2011, so it wasn't that many years later. But anybody ever so often check in and say, "So if I get some financing for this, you still game?" Sure, man. Sure. We didn't really have much of a script. I think we had a little bit of script, and then 3D, then Avatar, and then suddenly, there was all this interest in, so suddenly we could make a low budget, not the standards that I call low budget, but a low budget 3D movie, because people were interested in getting in on the 3D thing, so that's kind of how that happened, and that's why, because then it was like, how would you feel if it's in 3D? And I was like, no, what? Like I was really resistant. And then once I embraced the idea, then it was like, okay, and that's why I personally think it works much better in 3D because of the staticness. What you don't want in a 3D movie is a lot of movement because it'll make you nauseous. You can't so essentially your film grammar has been, you can't use that letter and you can't use that phrase because it just doesn't work in 3D. Now, someone like James Cameron with incredible cameras and focal lengths, because we're basically limited to this focal length. And he even said, and I jokingly say it was like shooting The Honeymooners, which is what Jen Jarmusch said about Stranger Than Paradise, that people enter a room, really, like 3D for me, what made it work for me is you're looking into this diorama, and you're kind of like, yeah. So you kind of, you find yourself like leaning forward and, I think 3D is really fun, so for me, the fun of that movie is in seeing it in 3D. And in 2D, I just feel like it, I hope everyone enjoys it, but to me, it's a little, static. It wouldn't be so static for me if I hadn't shot it in 3D. It would not have been as static as movie. It'd be more moving.
I honestly, I wish I could talk to you all day, but we both have things to do, and also as I said, the guys back is going to be mad at me.
I'm already mad at you, dude.
I will just briefly ask about Try Again, which I watched this morning, which is your last short, and is really great and very fun. Feels very much close to your work. And you said that was produced by the co-writer of American Mom, you said, or was it shot by him, or?
He shot it. He kind of, he did it for free, and he brought his equipment, so actually brought a lot of value to it, but basically he's a friend, and who was going to shoot it? Why don't I get Greg to shoot it? So it was produced by my partner, Janine, and written, and the guy who plays Walter wrote it based on, I just had this image. I was in my apartment, and I was sitting at a kitchen table, and I just had this image of just one shot, which was basically this slow Tarkovsky-esque, if you will, move in to a guy sitting at the table, and the closer you get, you realize he's got a gun in his hand, and the closer you get, you realize that there's a spray of blood on the wall behind him, and then you realize, oh, he's not alive, like he's just kind of slumped. So that's kind of I guess I speak of seed images a lot, but that's kind of like the idea of like, okay, how do I do a story about this guy? And then I basically just told Adam, yes, what I basically told him that image and about a guy alone in an apartment. What can we do with the thing about a guy alone musing on suicide? That was basically it. And then he quite openly acknowledges there's a Dorothy Parker poem called Resume, and the gist of it is it's a girl talking about a list of things that she would consider. Well, prison burns, guns are noisy. I don't remember how it goes. All the bad things about the various ways of killing, and the final thing is might as well live. And so that's where that came from. And then he's a comic writer. He's a stand-up guy, stand-up comedian, not comedian, but improv guy. And anyway, and actors are great because I want to put you in a movie. Will you write it? Absolutely. And fortunately, he turned in a script and made me laugh and so on. And I'm like, great, let's do it. So we shot it in like 2 days, 2.5 days. So that's yeah.
Well,
I'm glad you think it's like my other stuff because other people say it seems too or whatever. But yeah, I'm glad.
it's got the giant blood splatter. It's very funny. It's got the green stuff out of the mouth, and it's got like it's got the sort of a disorienting editing. I don't know. It feels very much of a piece of stuff, and also it's very very moving. I mean, like I take an interest in like mental health stuff and a lot of stuff I work on, and I found it very very moving. I was very very
Thank you.
Yeah.
It moves me. I mean, it definitely moves me. And a friend of mine from Gainesville, who's part of that whole Twisted Issues scene, he said, Charles, this movie might save lives. She was almost like scolding me, like, well, you made a movie that, kind of uplifting, just sweet,
Well, I agree with her. So I think on that
Awesome.
note might be a little bit of a good note to end, just because I talked to people said it as well. But thank you so much again for talking to me. It's been a pleasure.
Oh, I really appreciate the interest and so on. So, and the kind words.